So welcome everyone. This is webinar 2. We had a webinar 1 was a couple of weeks ago there, where we had a first pass at just looking at HRO, what it means and its application for the mining industry. Certainly well received actually, which was the impetus to go at the second webinar. Some etiquette there. It has auto muted everyone here just to keep the line free, and also on video as well, hence the push there to just go with the using the chat functionality while we go through. Agenda for those who are on the last webinar, very similar. A little bit of context from me. The meat of the evening will be with Dave. After I give him an intro, he will go deeper into the principles of HRO, and then look over the half of the time we're planning will be Q&A. So really, as we go through this, please ask the questions, log them out there. Amy, who's sitting in the same office as myself right now, will capture them and log them, and we'll make sure that we have them ready to go when we get up to the Q&A bit to blitz Dave. So context setting, as I mentioned, this is webinar 2 of 3. Webinar 1, 22nd of April, there was a light touch. If you haven't seen that, or you're interested in having a look at that, the presentation link is there, or the live Zoom is there on YouTube, and Christina can give you a copy of the presentation. And the follow-up webinar for this one will be webinar 3 in a couple of weeks there, June 3rd, same timing again, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. And this one really is around implementation, and it's really around questions from the field. So we will continue on. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so those who are new to mining or weren't on the last call, where this has come from was the Brady report was released, I think it was December last year, and it was really looking at the fatalities that occurred in the Queensland mining industry. A lot of details, I think 360 odd pages, but if you read the first 2 or 3, you get a flavour for the recommendations, which are summarised there on that particular slide. And the one that popped out for me, and after talking with Dave, was really that recommendation 6 there. We should adopt the principles of high reliability organisations, or the theory within the industry. And as I shared on the last call, I've been around mining for a while, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call have as well. That was new for me, and I was interested in understanding that more and seeing what we could learn as an industry, who we could talk to move forwards and understand it and understand how we could apply it. And thankfully, Dave was kind enough to put his hand up and act as the content expert for that, and is doing that again. So David Profin, who's the other video there. Those that heard him last time, he's obviously very good at what he does. So he's managing director of ForgeWorks, which are out of Melbourne, adjunct research fellow at Griffith, co-host of a really good podcast, The Safety of Work. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend you do. Some really good content on there, and really looking at the literature and its application. So highly recommend that. Look, he's been around the industry, oil and gas, construction for around 20 years, and he's got a PhD in safety science and is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Health and Safety. And as I also added last time, good guy, very smart, and very generous with his time. So look, we appreciate him sharing with that. And I will now hand over to Dave.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to make the assumption based on the unmute that I've got on my screen that everyone can hear me. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for the invitation, Christian. Look, fair bit of operational experience, quite a lot of safety experience, quite a lot of time researching around safety theory, very, very little time in mining. So whether that's a good thing or not a good thing, but diversity is good. So if you guys have got a lot of mining experience, then maybe I can provide some insights that you can add context to. So what I want to do in this is talk in more detail about the 5 HRO principles that I provided a high-level overview in the last webinar, And as I'm going through the 5 principles, if you've got questions that pop up, like Christian said, drop them in the chat. We will make sure we get through all the 5 principles. But if something comes into your head as I'm saying it, just log it, and then we'll be able to make sure that we answer it at the end. So just at a high level summary, so high reliability organization theory popped out in the late 1980s. So it's 30 or 35 years old. It's similar in many ways to theories of resilience engineering, safety differently, safety 2, human and organizational performance, or HOP. This was the first theory to describe the positive capacities that are required in organizations for safe and reliable operations. And this came 15 years before resilience engineering in the early 2000s. Another 5 years after that, safety 2 came along, and 5 years after that, safety differently came along. And in the last year or two, it seems to all be about HOP. But the Venn diagram that overlaps these theories is quite tight. So in the early 2000s, though, Carl Weick and Kathleen Sutcliffe, they published a book called Managing the Unexpected, where they really outline HRO theory. And we mentioned it as a reference last time, but it really is the book to go to if you want to read about HRO theory. And so the 5 principles that they lay out in that book are pretty much the generally accepted 5 principles of high reliability organization. So what I'm going to do now is talk in some detail about each of the principles, talk about some of the themes associated with that principle, and some of the considerations for practical application. The first principle there is preoccupation with failure. So this has evolved to also be lumped in as this idea that Professor Hopkins talks about as chronic unease. But this is this idea that high reliability organizations are always worried that something could go wrong around the next corner. So any lapse or any surprise or any change in the normal rhythm of day-to-day operations becomes an immediate signal or symptom that something could be wrong. So something that doesn't go as planned, or something that deviates. And in your industry, this could be something like, we didn't get as much work done today as we planned to do, or we didn't produce as much tonnage this week as we thought we were going to, or that train was late and it's late leaving our facility. So all these little lapses or surprises in your normal routine operations become a sign or a symptom that something could be wrong with the way that the system's functioning. So one of the things that really becomes important here is making sure that this information flows through your business. So this idea that mistakes and problems are going to happen in your operation is something that we've tried to push away from safety over the last 10 or 15 years, as we've embraced our ideas of zero harm, zero incidents, zero mistakes, the war on error. All of these things means that we're telling ourselves in our operations that these things aren't going to happen, and we're also telling them if they do happen, then we probably want to downplay them or not report them. And some of the things I'm going to talk about with these principles are going to be really obvious, and you're going to go, well, yeah, we're doing that. But most of this stuff comes out of a book that was written in 2001, so 20 years ago. And some of these things are going to go, oh, actually, we've actually been working for the last 20 years against what these principles and this theory says that we should be doing. So really, when organizations become wary of celebrating success. So this idea of a preoccupation with failure, you get very nervous when things go quiet for a while, and you also you don't take for granted when you are being successful for a period of time, because the fear is that this success tends to reduce safety margins. If you're doing something well, you've done something well for a long time, then you're feeling like your safety margin's really big, and you can probably start to chip away to address some of your cost pressures and production pressures. You feel like you can probably afford to chip away at your safety margins. One of the things that gets done very well with organizations in relation to preoccupation with failure is their risk management activities. Now here I'm not talking about like pre-task risk assessments or those types of things. I'm talking about the risk management work that you do around your major accident events or your failure scenarios, your catastrophic failure scenarios with the operations. How deeply that work's done, how open and honest that work is, how often it's reviewed, and how it's used to make operational decisions in your business. That work becomes really, really important, and probably that risk work becomes fairly central to the role of a safety person as well, and the safety discussions that we're having in our operations. One of the things that we also need to work on here is that failure is not as bad as it sounds. So language becomes, I think language is one of the real problems and opportunities for safety. And an example is, one of the things I like about high reliability operations is it's a safety theory that doesn't have the word safety in the title. So it allows us to understand that safety is generated by how we run our operations, or their safety outcomes are a function of how we run our operations. And language is important. But failure isn't as bad as it sounds. Failure happens. And ironically, the more that organizations embrace the fact that we're going to have mistakes, we're going to have problems, we're going to have surprises, we're going to have failures, the more that they accept and embrace that and talk about it and not fear that sort of discussion, the more likely they are to identify them early when they're happening, and also to put practices and things in place to prevent them from happening. The more you run away from failure, the more likely you are to have failure in your operation. And the research, particularly the emerging research in the last 5 or 10 years, is showing that. And and I appreciate that that's really challenging for organisations to accept and think about. So in practice, what does it mean in practice? I always try to be as practical as I can. I'll probably never succeed as being as practical as you like. So feel free to ask me some very practical questions. But with this principle is this idea around just culture and accountability and cultures of blame and 3 strikes and you're out and take the contractor off site because of the breach of our rules. I'll talk a bit later. The most important thing in a high reliability organization is the flow of information, the open flow of information. So if you take one thing away from this webinar, take away that we have to do everything we can to make sure that information flows fast and freely throughout our organization. So it doesn't matter what the fear is, or it doesn't matter what the constraint is to stop that. Anything that's going to stop fast and free flow of information in your organization creates, slows our understanding down of what's going on in our operation. It slows our ability to respond down. So these ideas, all of these ideas around just culture become really important. And these are really challenging. And we know we're facing these as safety professionals in all high hazard industries, how we balance blame, accountability, learning, and justice in our businesses. In practice, like I mentioned just briefly before, the effectiveness of your risk management practices. Take a good, critical, hard look at how you're doing your risk work in your business and how you're using that risk work to make decisions. That's all I'll say about that. And then your learning processes. So preoccupation with failure is all about doing something with weak signals before they become big signals. So if you're chronically uneasy about the safety of your operation, you're getting that information, and I'll talk next about what you do with that information. You've got to have learning processes to work out what that means. It's not just okay to have the information reported to you. You've got to have a way of synthesizing that information and working out what it means for your operation. So that's principle 1, preoccupation with failure. That's the starting point. That getting the organization focused around the idea that mistakes are going to happen, and the best thing we can do is make sure we identify them and share them as quickly as we possibly can. So principle number 2 is reluctance. Is called reluctance to simplify. And so there is a little bit of a sequence in relation to these 5 principles. And when you've got these weak signals and when you've got this information flowing in your organization about what could go wrong and what is going wrong as it happens, you've got to have a way of actually interpreting that and making sense of that. And so this principle can be a little bit abstract and a little bit hard to understand, but let me talk it through. So as people, we simplify things in order to stay focused all the time. So tell me your top 3 priorities. Now you've got 10 things that you're doing, but we kind of just want to know the first 3. when you go into a meeting, you'll hear something like, "Oh, can you just go through that by exception?" Which means a lot of the small stuff might not be important, even though you might not know its level of importance. But we're always looking to simplify and streamline our information. That lets us get stuff done. It lets us navigate the world. We don't have to expend a whole lot of effort on every single thing. But the less that we simplify, the more we're able to see. So high reliability organizations actually, they deliberately try to create a more complete and nuanced picture of their operation. So what that means is that when you're talking about a site and you get asked a question about a site, like providing a generalized answer about the whole site may not be, isn't as useful as talking about the maintenance team, the operations team, the planning department, the engineering organization, what's happening in the HSE team, and actually high reliability organizations, their big picture is not a strategic picture as such. Their big picture is actually one that is as big a picture as they can about their operation. So they're still looking down, but they're looking really, really broad at their business. One of the things that really becomes a challenge to safety is the way that we label and categorize things. So high reliability organizations really get nervous when they think that they've seen a repeat event, because when we see a repeat event, we tend to think that we know how to manage it because that's what happened last time. And so we discount information because, you know, most of the information in this situation looks similar to things that have happened before. And a couple of famous, the best way of making this abstract sort of concept a little bit more real for people is that sort of two of the bigger disasters in the last couple of decades. So the Columbia Space Shuttle foam strikes sort of breaking away on launch, or the insulating foam of the rocket boosters breaking away on launch, was what NASA called an in-family event. So they'd already investigated hundreds of foam breakaway events before and foam strikes on the shuttle. And so when they had this other foam strike where it struck the leading edge of the wing, it was an in-family event. It was foam breaking away. It happened before. It hit the shuttle. It had happened before. They'd investigated a lot of times. So they thought that they understood the problem. And it's the same with the Macondo well blowout and the well testing process. The pressure testing wasn't within the tolerances, or it wasn't within the standard. But the team that were well testing had seen the bladder effect before in terms of taking reservoir pressures. It looked like it, it smelt like it, so it was categorized as that, and we know what happened after that. So this reluctance to simplify, I mean, it makes things hard because it almost says don't take anything on face value. You always have to look for the deeper and more complex picture. And in a world that really wants to categorize and wants to simplify everything, a high reliability organization puts in place processes and practices to actually intentionally make things more complicated. So in practice here, you'd be intentionally creating a more comprehensive safety and operational review discussion, finding a way to pull more information into that safety discussion. So not just safety leading and lagging information, but operational information, people information from human resources, production and procurement information, and as much as it, so you can build as big a picture as you can to have a nuanced safety discussion. You need to have ways of integrating different perspectives. So one person raising an issue and one person saying they know what it is unlikely to probably ask enough questions and get enough different perspectives to really get to the bottom of the problem. One of the other things you can do is, as I suppose, or we can do, assuming that a number of people are in safety practitioner type of roles, is be attentive to some of these phrases that we hear in our business. Oh yeah, we know what this is. Oh yeah, we've had this before. Oh yeah, we're following the same process as last time. Anywhere where there's so patterns and repeat events is a concern for high reliability organizations, because they be of the view that no two situations are the same. and you've constantly got to revise your situation assessment. You've constantly got to absorb new information, and you've constantly got to assume that every situation is going to be different. So in this principle too, you've got this preoccupation with failure. You're identifying and raising the weak signals, and now you're deeply interrogating those weak signals for what the underlying meaning is in relation to the reliability of your operations and your safety. So principle number three is about the sensitivity to operations. So in this way, this is about how well the organisation is responsive and accepting of the messy reality of operations. So being attentive to the front line where the work gets done. So what tends to happen is that organisations focus on supporting and fixing things to support their operators to manage their routine work every day. So you don't have situations where we've had to shelve these 3 alarms because we haven't got the capex yet to go and fix this issue. So we're just going to have to put up with these couple of alarms on the dashboards, and I get it. All operations operate in a degraded state, but a high reliability organisation is focuses resources, effort towards maintaining the best available operational situation for their teams and for their technology. So the operations team doesn't have to operate with compromises, doesn't have to operate with unnecessary vulnerabilities. High reliability organizations, they also value experience as well as technical knowledge. So thinking in the organisation about how we value operators and operational experience, as we value engineers, as we value safety professionals, as we value finance and strategy people. So there's a sensitivity to operational experience, and that'll become important in the next couple of principles. But these organisations are really careful to make sure that they invest in and that they support and that they pay attention to their levels of experience within their operation, because it's kind of like an underlying foundation to identifying weak signals, being able to understand them, and then in the next couple of principles, being able to do something about them. I mentioned earlier in practice that open communication is the most critical process. And this is it, is information has to flow out of your operation outwards towards the organisation, and then the organisation has to have a bias towards acting on that information to support the operations to do their job. One of the things that organisations who are sensitive to operations is there's no kind of like mindlessness in any of the routines that happen. So even if it's an operator who's doing their daily rounds or daily checks, there's no tick and flick happening in a high reliability organisation. So operators are sensitive to the status of each individual piece of equipment that they're checking, and then managers are sensitive to what the implications of every decision they're making in every meeting is going to be for the operation. So wrapped up around these principles, high reliability organisation theory has this idea of mindfulness, which I mentioned in the last webinar, actually came out of, so mindfulness was first talked about in relation to safety and operations in this theory. And that's about saying that everything that we do is done with a bias towards enabling the reliability of our operation, and is also done without any careless routine or surface level of compliance. And I know that's hard, and I know it's a constant challenge in safety, is to get the quality and the discipline and the intention behind all of the activities that happen kind of in the workplace, or just for each of us in our lives as well. And what that kind of means is you need to have less stuff for people to do. That is one thing as a sideline that we've learned in some of our research. For the person who mentioned decluttering earlier, is that if you give people less things to do, quality and compliance go up. We know that that's a repeated finding in all our kind of decluttering research. So the other thing in here is being reactive is important. We have a saying that we all love to not be reactive. We'd all like to be proactive, and HRO actually really balances it. Actually, if I'm if I give it probably the credit that that it should get, it is HRO theory probably says that being reactive is more important than being proactive. Because you can't predict the world, the best thing is to do is start with the weak signal and be as reactive as hell from there, in terms of picking up the weak signal, trying to interpret it, trying to act on behalf of supporting operations to return to normal, and then the next couple of principles we talked about. So this is one of those things that flies in our face a little bit of some of the things we've been trying to do with our roles, in that it's okay and probably actually quite valuable to be reactive with a good action orientation. And it doesn't mean just reactive to incidents. That actually means reactive before the incident happens, if that makes some sense. So the fourth principle, and I'm moving through because I really want to get your, I see some questions and some discussion happening, and I really want to get this information in. So principle 4 is about a commitment to resilience, and going back to this preoccupation with failure, this is that problems and mistakes are inevitable. So look, one of the ways I could try to describe this is that you don't put a child on a bicycle and just tell them not to fall off and expect them never to fall off. You know that some kind of mistake and crash. Actually, my daughter had her first big bike crash on the a day or two ago, and you know that mistakes are inevitable. So you build capacity in them to be confident in what they're doing. You provide helmets and you do these things, but you know that mistakes are going to happen. So you try to not put them on too big a hill, the first time that they ride their bike, so that there's a soft landing and a bit of a safer a way of them to be resilient to the inevitable mistake. So that's one thing that we need to change in our language. We need to talk about human fallibility. So people doing things that we don't expect is like gravity. It's like weather. It's just another foreseeable hazard. We're never going to have a workplace that has people involved in any part of the process, even the design of autonomous vehicles. We're never going to have any workplace where there's someone who does something that we don't expect. So we've kind of in safety got to say, well, that's going to happen. So what do we do about it? And not in terms of telling ourselves that we can tell our people, not to make mistakes, but how do we make sure our operations are able to detect and contain and bounce back when that mistake happens. So high reliability organisation, and it's interesting that these guys in 2001, really before zero harm and all these things got legs, they actually write in their book that that you never see the word perfection in high reliability organisation theory. You never see the word zero. You never see the word any of these absolute terms, which we've actually now got all throughout our safety vernacular. An organisation has to know that people need to fill in the gaps to get around the challenges that they face every day. So they need to foster some of this initiative and workarounds. And one of the things that that organisations always also need to be mindful of is the more rules and requirements and things that we put in place that limit the flexibility people have to manage their work in different but still safe and reliable ways, means the less degrees of freedom we're giving them to be able to respond to the events that they face in their work. So sometimes you can have a near miss, and people have kind of like deviated their operations to come up with a situation, and you go like, "Whew, that was good. We got away with that, but we can't have people making that kind of a deviation again." And you kind of like constrain that opportunity for people to be resilient in that situation. So I'm not saying you permit people to create unsafe and unreliable workarounds, but what I'm saying is the more that we think that there's only one way to perform a routine operations means that if something happens that's different, we haven't necessarily provided flexibility into our operation to be able to sort of navigate that challenge without it sort of cascading. The more time that it takes to respond to a situation, the bigger the situation gets. So time becomes really critical, which is why I talked about being really reactive to the weak signal, and it's also why I think that we also need to be really close to our operations. so that we can act on things quickly. On reflection through this theory, it surprises me how much time in my career that I have accepted that sort of degraded operational conditions are okay. It's been like that for a week, it's been like that for 2 weeks, we'll leave it like that. And that becomes a very slippery slope for the condition of your operations. When we think about some of the high reliability organizations where this has been done, it has been researched, like air traffic control. Like you think of like the Air Services Australia or some of the air traffic control organisations, if they had like a screen out where they couldn't see a couple of planes in the sky at any point in time, but they could see most of the planes, like that condition just like I wouldn't operate with that condition in place. And I know that's not necessarily feasible with cost and capital allocation and things like that, but the mindset that we have to have into our business is that we have to allocate effort and capital towards maintaining a high standard of a high standard operational environment for our work. We also in terms of in practice around commitment to resilience, so be wary of the zero incident pressure, because it's probably driving a lot of opportunity for you to invest in being resilient out of your business. You also want to build teamwork and problem solving capacity, because what happens with people if you watch a work group and we do that a little bit in research, and when you watch a work group and they come across something that's a surprise, they sort of huddle together, they share their information, they work out what they need to do, they draw in resources. That's kind of exactly what we're talking about, but there's actually ways that you can build, enhance this problem solving capacity. And other industries you'd be familiar with, like crew resource management, which is how you bring the collective wisdom of a crew together and have them understand how to draw that out of each other. And investing in problem solving capacity and problem solving skills is really important. And I talked about being wary of adding unnecessary constraints. One of the things that it says in this commitment to resilience is also thinking about how you've got uncommitted resources in your organisation, which is also termed, I suppose, in the resilience engineering literature as slack. So that's just having people on the bench, basically. And I know that you're probably never going to have a world where you're rostering extra people. So this is where people have to be able to draw people in real time. So I wonder if you're in a corporate safety team, and if a site rang up and said, I need support today because we really need to resolve an issue, would it be generally understood in your corporate team that the expectation is drop your corporate work and join the team at site to resolve that issue? Because these are the things that I think you probably want to think about in terms of how you're drawing resources in to support the operation. Now, we've probably actually tried to extract some of those teams, and I've been on some of those teams that have probably tried to extract themselves out of those operations rather than sort of lean in towards them. So the last principle is principle 5, which is deference to expertise. So this is about saying, so all organizations have hierarchies, and high reliability organizations are no different. But what you want to do is actually cultivate a culture and environment that invites and welcomes and values diverse perspectives and experiences. Here I want to say that expertise is different to experience. So what the theory says is that expertise rarely resides in one person. You'll have someone with some experience, you'll have someone with some technical knowledge, you'll have someone who has a similar sort of situation, someone who knows that particular piece of kit or something like that. So expertise is actually a relational thing, and so this is where we start to talk about how we actually bring. Sometimes you can go to an individual, and it's absolutely true. Sometimes there'll be an expert. So some organisations you might have, within your engineering team, you'll have a process engineer or a mechanical engineer who's responsible for pumps, and they know every single pump on that site, and 99 times out of 100 expertise will be just in that person, but it won't always be like that. The theory goes into quite some detail, and this is again like this stuff's written a long time ago and talks about that senior people always get filtered good news. So if information has to flow, if you think about a weak signal, something coming out of your operation, being categorized, flowing up into a management meeting, by the time it gets anywhere, it's kind of a month or 6 weeks old. The problem's sat in operations for 6 weeks. They might have been able to kind of work around it for a while, and it might actually never get fixed. So in this deference to expertise, we've got to enable information to flow sideways in an organisation. Like the operator's got to be able to go direct to engineering. Even the safety department needs to be careful of stuff not going up to the safety person, and the safety person going out and trying to fix something and then coming back up. So it's really about making sure that I don't know how this is probably one part of the theory that I actually don't know how to do it and in practice, but they say that high reliability organizations create processes where decisions that need to be made actually search for expertise. People actually say, I need more information to make this decision. And the organization will have a language and a process around actually, trying to find where that expertise sits in the business. I haven't seen it done well, or I couldn't think of an example where I'd seen that actually done really, really well. We really want to, I suppose in experience, I'll just say it again, and I've said it before, is we really want to value operational experience. And, we value formal education, we value people with MBAs, we fast track people through organisational roles. We have people in site leadership positions who might have 3 years of experience, and they're, a site supervisor or I don't know what the mining industry is like. I think you probably have, slower and more stable career paths of people, but I suppose that might not be the case with FIFO and the cyclical nature of the industry. But high reliability organizations, they value the greybeards. They value the people who've worked in the engineering department for 30 or 40 years. They value the operators who've been in the plant for 35 years. They make effort to invest authority in those people, not necessarily hierarchical authority, but leadership authority in the operation. And again, that's quite hard to do in our modern organisational structures, but we've actually got to find ways to make sure we're not pushing expertise out of our business. Sorry, we're not pushing experience out of our business, because very often experience is what brings expertise to a situation. I think from there, it's probably best to go into question and answer, but I'll just summarise. And like I said, there is some sequence to these. So the first three principles, they categorise as anticipation principles. So this is about the ability to anticipate. So this preoccupation with failure lets you detect really small discrepancies in your operation. The principle about reluctance to simplify means you see these discrepancies for actually what they are or what they could turn into. The third one is about sensitivity to operations, which means proactively you're supporting the operation to operate at a consistently high level, such that those weak signals become very visible. If you're focusing a lot of effort in your operation and you're supporting your operation and you're got a consistent, clear operating standard, then discrepancies from that standard become quite clear to see. And then the last two principles are containment, what they classify as containment principles, which means you are going to have problems, so you need to actually have a commitment to resilience. So your ability to contain, to bounce back from these unexpected surprises, and then deference to expertise. Because as these issues arise, you need flexible operating dynamics that enable these problems to search out expertise really, really fast to get resolved. So that's probably a little bit longer than I wanted to talk to, but people know that I can't usually stick on time once you give me the microphone. But now I can see that there's been a fair bit on the chat. So Christian, how about we get some hard questions happening?
Yep, agree, Dave. Amy's kept the log here, so I'll fire one at you. So from Paolo here, do you see any value in implementing safety 2 principles whilst attempting to become a HRO, or maybe moving towards a HRO, perhaps because their socio-technical attributes are similar?
Yeah, so So I think on labels, I probably wouldn't get too hung up on whether you think you're doing HRO or whether you think you're doing safety too. I would get very clear on what I'm trying to improve in my operation, and talk about that in a simpler language, in clearer language, and as outcome focused language as I could. I think where I see organisations try to say to their business, let's do safety too, you're then creating a big discussion about what that is, and the whole theory and how different it might be. So underneath those labels of safety 2 and HRO, there's some really, really good, clear principles for how you should run a safe and reliable operation. And so all I try to do is say, wherever you pick it from, whatever theory you pick what you're trying to do from, just talk about that. That's in most organizations, I think that's probably going to be a faster way to get stuff happening, and a less threatening way for businesses to get stuff happening. Thanks, Paulo.
All right, we've got a good one here from Bobby, and quite timely in light of what's happened today with the passing of industrial manslaughter legislation.
I saw the Curia mail today. Even though I'm in Melbourne, right. I've got parents who live in Brisbane, and anything sort of related to safety, I get messaged out of the Curia mail every day. That's kind of their pastime.
Nice. So Bobby's questions are around letting nothing get in the way of free flow of information. Then what are the thoughts about the impact of information flow in the context of industrial manslaughter legislation that's just come out?
Yeah, look, I think if you can start, so starting by getting stuff to flow really freely at a site level is the starting point, and I suppose there's still a lot of pressure for that to happen. I know at a site level, particularly a large site level, with programs around zero harm, and with investigations, and with employment consequences around certain things. So I suppose I'd say with industrial manslaughter, so I'd say that's probably a less of an issue if you're focusing on flowing stuff freely at a site level. And then from there, it's about flowing that site information freely into functional organisations within corporate. And there's a whole lot of new political challenges to flow stuff freely from site to head office. But I don't think, Bobby, I've got a great example on how to solve industrial manslaughter other than maybe just that advice. If we can get our sites to talk freely and openly, and then we can get some of the core functional departments to talk freely and openly with the sites all the time, then we're probably a long way there. But I agree, as soon as, and we're talking about flowing weak signals. So I mean, I suppose if you've had a really serious sort of near failure or failure, then that probably invokes a whole new set of rules about how you flow information. But if we're talking about the weak signals, then let's try and see how much people communicate to site level first, maybe.
So Larry had kind of a statement, but probably also a question. It was a really good point that you talked about the reactivity, and it's okay to be reactive. And Larry's question is just in around, well, so would a HRO probably be doing more in that space, on the reactive side of things, compared to their equivalent? And that's probably what we're looking for.
Yeah, look, I think they probably, a HRO probably would, because it'd be so sensitive to what the operations need. You probably wouldn't see a lot of, I mean, I'm just thinking on the spot, but you probably wouldn't want to see a lot of proactive programs. So a lot of things that organizations spend their proactive time on in their strategies, like maybe new leadership programs, or I suppose administrative activity and audit activity, and maybe some training programs, or whatever's in your strategy, because you'll be sort of tuned in and only given the operation what the operation needs and what's required. So you probably would see less of what we normally see now as proactive activity, is the big bells and whistles kind of safety related programs, and you probably see more you probably see more work going into responding swiftly to the needs of the operation. And like an aircraft carrier, you walk into an air traffic control room or an aircraft carrier, or maybe an operating theatre in a hospital or some of these other areas, and you don't see a lot of that sort of the stuff that's unnecessary to support the immediate operation.
Thanks, Dave. All right, question here from Tim. So I've also heard from others, people in the HOP space suggest we should move away from, zero harm statements and the like. What does that mean though in setting an expectation for the organisation? Where do we want to head with safety?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a big discussion, and I mean, we could do a whole webinar on zero harm. We did a whole podcast on zero harm. Actually, interestingly, the most popular episode that we've done in 6 months on the Safety of Work podcast. Just to plug that quickly, I think you might have to figure out how to do it. You might have to figure out how to do it. I tell people, if you want to use the zero language, you might want to change it from zero harm to zero fatalities. And at least then you can actually have the conversation about what are we doing to ensure that we have zero fatalities, and reviewing TRIFR and things like that. You can have a conversation with your business to say that reviewing this rolled ankle isn't really, investing effort towards ensuring that we have zero fatalities. So with some organizations, we're working on changing their zero language to that. And then over time, if you have that language of zero fatalities, or even if you've got the zero harm language, talk to your organization about, so how exactly are we getting zero harm? And have a consistent narrative about, and an aligned narrative in the organization about what you're actually doing to ensure that you have zero harm, and then turn that narrative into actually what you're talking about all the time. So if, for example, you say we want to ensure zero harm by understanding and controlling our critical risks, then that's kind of the language that you talk about, and the harm just becomes the outcome. So I think I'd like to see people take up that challenge with zero harm, and no other function in an organization runs away from stuff. Like, it's not like the sales team is saying our target is zero lost bids or something like that. Like, we want to be proactive in our language. We want stuff that's engaging for people. We want something that's actually achievable. So I don't underestimate the challenge of trying to do it, but I encourage you to have a crack at it.
Nice. We're getting pumped with questions over here, so I've probably got time for 2 more, and then we'll keep a log of all the others and certainly loop back on them. So, question from Stacey: do you think the pressure to fix is slowly starting to transition to pressure to learn?
Sorry, mate, can you just have a go at the first half of that again?
Yeah. Do you think the pressure to fix is slowly starting to transition to pressure to learn?
Pressure to fit. I'm going to have to read that one, mate. I don't want to answer the wrong. Pressure to fit. Okay. I hope so, but I hope it's both. I hope it's pressure to learn and to fix. Yeah, I think originally it's pressure. It was pressure to make the problem go away, which is kind of the fix pressure. And I suppose there is. I'm hoping, and I think there is a bit more pressure to understand and learn, as well as fix it. Yeah, so I hope so. Mate, I know you're going to ask me another one, but I'm going to have to respond to Tim, because yes, Drew and I did bag the Brady report. The way it was done and the findings as being largely unhelpful for your industry. The thing about HRO, organisational theory, yes, we bagged that in the sense of, if people just take HRO as a program and put posters up and run their operators through training that tells them to report weak signals and pay attention when they're doing their rounds, we kind of did bag that. But the underlying theory, and that's why I like these webinars, actually underneath the theory, there's really, really good principles for how to run a safe and reliable operation. So I suppose, Tim, if if the underlying content of the theory gets picked up, then it'll be a really good way forward. I just, you know, just don't have a lot of faith and trust that industry, and my career's been in industry, will do that consistently well.
And I guess, Dave, that's part of what we're looking to do through this mechanism as well, is help industry as much as possible. Yeah, come to a common understanding of that, then everyone try it by themselves, and we all end up replicating, making the same mistakes, and back to square one anyway.
Okay.
So, last question from Dennis. What's the view on HRO and safety and health management systems that consist of hundreds of documents with the expectation that each is executed to the letter? You know, that sort of flavour, and that is certainly pertinent to all of the mining industry.
Yeah, and I worked a long time in oil and gas. Like I said, I hadn't been in mining, but there was, you know, people did say to me at certain companies that, you know, you had to do 8 hours of paperwork to be able to do 8 hours of work. It was like a 1-for-1 match between the sort of the paperwork preparation and the field time. And oil and gas is kind of no different. Look, it's got to go. A lot of that's got to go. Like I said earlier, the research that we've been looking at, when you remove that and just leave what's, you know, useful and important, then the quality and compliance of that of those processes goes up. So I can only say maybe we'll do another webinar. Look, there might be a bit of interest. Maybe we'll do a webinar on safety clutter and the onus of compliance and how to get started and what to do. We've written a few papers on that. I put a LinkedIn post up on that last week that got about 100 comments or something on safety clutter, as we call it. So yeah, all I'd say is if you've got 100 documents in your system, 100 operationally facing documents, I don't know how you manage that, but a lot of companies do.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, everyone. We'll keep moving through, and you can see Bobby's comment there that some stuff happening through QRC around helping industry around this. So thanks, Bobby, for that update, and we'll stay abreast of that as well.
And what I'll do is, if I can work out what everyone's names, depending on what they've signed in with, I can actually send you a LinkedIn message or something with an answer to your question, if you like, as well.
Yep.
So
we'll have that detail, Dave.
Cool. All right, I'll do that.
Yep. Okay. So I did have some questions in reserve, and I did say it was the last question, but I'm really keen to get thoughts from the floor as well, and this might be the last question. Well, will be the last question, then we'll wrap up. One of the things I was reflecting on over the last week, and Dave has touched on it here, is around that, you know, strong response to a weak signal. And when I was reading through that and reflecting on that, what popped out at me straight away is around the monitoring activities we do for our critical controls, our critical control management process. That to me feels like a classic example of where we can get some weak signals, and I think all of us may be doing that to a different level of degree of success. So there's a question I'll throw out to everyone interested in their response, and then also Dave, whilst people are typing, maybe you can just share your thoughts there. But so how's your organisation going to be able to respond strongly to the critical control monitoring that's taking place? So that would be one, interested there, and then if there's anything that comes to mind, there's other examples of weak safety signals which are pertinent to mining that you might want to share as well, because that would obviously be very good for us to share and learn from as a group. And then whilst, as I said, Dave, whilst people are putting some stuff there, you know, what are your thoughts in and around this space?
So do you want me to start talking, Chris?
Yes, please.
So a couple of things. So with critical control monitoring signals, I think I don't know the way around some of this stuff. So I'll just throw out some challenges, but it won't necessarily be helpful. Most of the programs we see have target compliance levels with their critical control. So I want to see 99% or 100% control effectiveness. And anything like that, we just need to know how much pressure that puts on things to be ticked and flicked. I was at an oil and gas organisation that their critical control monitoring, and just for example, is around bunding of tanks, and when the audit actually went through, this was actually in Papua New Guinea, and they couldn't actually find the tank because it was so overgrown with all the vines and the grass and the jungle. It took them a while to find it, but there was weekly critical control text that yes, it's all clear, yes, the bunding's intact, yes, it's this, and the pressure to get that control effectiveness up at 99 or 100% is a challenge. So not helpful, but I think you've almost got to look at each. You've got to get the information first. So the thing about weak signals is you have to get the information. Anything you're doing to not get the information means that you just don't have an opportunity to do anything with it. And the only other one with weak safety signals is I'd change that to weak operational signals, and I'd be actually getting many of the examples used in the theory are like what's going on in your maintenance department, particularly what's going on in your operations department, and what's going on with your levels of production. So when you start seeing changes happen, so why have we done extra maintenance hours this week, or why have we, like they're the sorts of things that your changing operation is going to actually generate the changes in safety risk. So we should probably be moving away from leading safety indicators into operational indicators that provide that shape safety risk.
Good. Thanks, Dave. And it looks like Bobby's just shared that BMA is actually exploring machine learning in that space. So maybe we can be updated on where that goes. That sounds really
Bobby, we did some of that with well drilling after we'd done 1,000 wells and ran it through a machine learning thing, and actually learnt where a huge amount about our operation. So good on you.
Okay, so we've got only a couple of minutes left. Some of these other questions we'll just tidy over. So where to next from here? This was similar to what was put up last time. Dave, well, you made reference to these to these resources anyway, the bottom three there, which were really, really good. And I've actually started reading some of those books, and heavy reading, but really good. Talked about the previous webinar, you can get some info there. And as I shared, look, the Dave's podcast with Drew Ray, really good. A lot of us do a lot of time on the road, so recommend you download and have a listen in there. Dave, did you want to add anything else on those resources?
No, not at all. No. That's the second bottom book there is the book that I referred to, Managing the Unexpected.
Yep. Excellent. So we talked about this. I might hand over to you, Dave. You described this slide better than me last time.
Yeah, look, so. I mean, we can still kind of we're happy to kind of facilitate like a session like this, specifically with your operation. If you want to get a few people together from your company and do it, and then if anyone wants to get started, we can point you towards how you might do your own HRO maturity assessment. So, or how you might get some support to do that if you want to actually do where are the opportunities within this theory where you might be currently where you might be able to make the big improvements. And then what we're going to do in webinar 3 is, well, I just realized, Christian, webinar 3 was meant to be an hour of Q&A. So what we could actually do is just take all these questions, and it almost probably gives us another hour anyway. So we might take these questions and then we might break them up into sort of, some common questions and take some key questions out of it. And that might get us started next time.
Certainly agree. Dave and I had some similar concepts there. So yes, we'll carry over a lot of these questions into the next, and certainly we'll reach out to you prior to the next webinar to see if you had any additional questions that we can also link, bring into there. It doesn't matter if you're going to attend webinar 3 or not, interested in your questions that we could summarize up and really start to capture what are those key questions across industry. So, finally, thanks again for everyone who's joined. Bobby, I did see your questions for me. I didn't want to use Dave's time, so I'll come back maybe in the next webinar and answer some of those or share my thoughts. Similar to previous, this will get recorded. We'll get the slides and we'll share it out as quickly as possible. Any final thoughts, Dave, from yourself?
No, thank you. These are fun. Sorry if they kind of ramble around a little bit, but I kind of get stuck into the content and get a bit excited sometimes.
That's good. Very helpful, Dave. Yeah, really good information. So look, from my end, thank you everyone for joining. On behalf of Impress and Dave, thank you again for spending some of your time on here and sharing your information. Look, I appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else on the call does as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right. So thank you all. We'll speak again soon. Bye-bye.